Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge for various early PC systems, although it was later re-released as the Special Edition, which is what you're seeing in this video, which was released on PC, iOS, PlayStation Network, and Xbox Live Arcade. This is a point-and-click adventure game and the sequel to The Secret of Monkey Island. It was made by LucasArts and originally released in December of 1991, with the Special Edition being released in 2010. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons, the first of which being it started development before the guys making it even knew what exactly had happened with The Secret of Monkey Island. It started a month after The Secret of Monkey Island went into the manufacturing stage, which is where they were putting together the actual physical game copies to be sold. And so they went into the development of Monkey Island 2 without even knowing what was going to be the reception for the original game, and it turned out that they had to follow the act of one of the best games ever made. And that's a tough act to follow, an extremely tough act, a pretty much impossible act to follow, frankly. And so what ultimately happened with Monkey Island 2 LeChuck's Revenge? It was very well received when it came out for a variety of reasons, including the introduction of the iMuse system, which is a music sequencing engine that they implemented into the Scum engine at the time that allowed for more dynamic and interactive music sampling, which, needless to say, was a pretty big deal at the time. And it also received some praise for its sense of humor and its gameplay, but the question really becomes, how is this as a follow-up to The Secret of Monkey Island? Is it something that is very fitting of the series' legacy, or is it something that people were just looking on highly because it's the sequel to one of the best games ever made? And I feel I should restate that I entered this series with The Curse of Monkey Island, which was the third game, not this, and not the original. So my perspective on Monkey Island 2 is pretty much the same perspective I had going into The Secret of Monkey Island. The difference being that by the time I got to Monkey Island 2, I had experienced The Secret of Monkey Island, and it had already become one of my favorite games ever. And so while I didn't really go into this thing with a fully fresh perspective, I had just come off the heels of The Secret of Monkey Island. I literally finished The Secret of Monkey Island and then started up Monkey Island 2. So I was going into it with that perspective more than anything else. So there's really not any real nostalgia to blind me here. So let's go ahead and delve right into that question of how this thing is as a follow-up to one of the best games ever made, and where the series went from there. Well, as far as presentation goes, it's very, very similar to the VGA version of The Secret of Monkey Island in that it's about that level of quality. So they do have quite a bit of detail in certain respects, and it's of course bright, colorful graphics that give off that sense of adventure and humor in most respects. Now, like I said before, this is the special edition of the game, which means that it also comes with the special edition graphics, and I never use them because, once again, I don't like how they look. But they're about the same as if you've played The Secret of Monkey Island Special Edition, and I will have a short comparison clip here for you, but suffice to say, I really don't care for the art style in the Special Edition release, but your mileage may vary with that. Now, there are also two things you will notice in this one, and the first of these is that there is voice acting in these clips that I'm showing. That's because the Special Edition re-release actually had voice acting like the Special Edition re-release of the original game, but this time around they actually allow you to switch the voice acting on for the original graphics version of the game. So I actually did that, and I rather enjoy the voice acting in this. It's silly, it's ridiculous, and more importantly, it fits in really, really well with the rest of the Monkey Island games, particularly considering they got several of the same actors to do the same characters that they've done in other games in the series. So that really does add a lot of charm to the game, and the original release was lacking this. So your mileage may vary on this as well, but I personally like it, and it's great that if you don't like it, you can turn it off. It's not that big of a deal. But then there's the music, which is about like what you would expect after having played The Secret of Monkey Island. It's still that kind of Caribbean reggae sort of thing going on. And they do mix a few tracks that are pretty similar to what you saw in The Secret of Monkey Island. But I really don't like the rendition of the Monkey Island theme in this one. I feel like it's incredibly weak. And while the music is charming to some degree, it's just not quite as magical as the original game's music was. It's still very, very good stuff, but it's just not quite there, if that makes sense. Now, they did also use the iMuse audio sequencing engine that allows for dynamic music changes, so they actually use that quite a lot in this game, and that does lend some interesting technical things to the game. But once again, the music is just not quite as memorable as The Secret of Monkey Island. And as for the sound effects, they work. There's a lot of slapsticky sounds in this thing, and they work very, very well. But apart from that, there's really not a huge amount of great sound effects in this thing. It's just stuff that is good for what it does, and nothing more, nothing less. That's pretty much what you would expect of any high-quality adventure game of the day, let's put it that way. But what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this is that you are once again Guybrush Threepwood, mighty pirate, and the game actually starts out with him telling these other pirates about how he defeated LeChuck, and they're sick of hearing about it. It turns out that Guybrush has kind of been living large off of his success of defeating LeChuck, and now he is off looking for the treasure known as Big Whoop, and he's trying to find a ship that will take him there. But there's a problem with that. The island he's on is under something called the Largo Embargo, where Largo Legrand, who's just basically a thug that was formerly a servant of LeChuck, has basically taken the island hostage and is extorting everyone, having his way with the various businesses on the island, and so on and so forth. And so the game actually starts out with you trying to lift this Largo embargo, and thus you can go off in search of the treasure of Big Whoop. Now you may be wondering where LeChuck comes into this. Well, LeChuck ends up getting resurrected as a zombie. So now he's the zombie pirate LeChuck, which is ridiculous. But he's, of course, extremely angry that Guybrush managed to defeat him, and so he goes off on a quest to defeat Guybrush again. Now, here's my main problem with the plot of Monkey Island 2. It's not so much the plot itself, it's the fact that it doesn't really feel like a natural extension from The Secret of Monkey Island. The first game didn't really set itself up for a proper sequel, so it stands to reason that they kind of just did whatever they wanted to with this. But again, it just doesn't feel like a natural continuation. It feels kind of contrived in a lot of spots. But the worst part about it is that it's just not quite as funny as The Secret of Monkey Island. It's still a very funny game. It's still got the same guys working on it. You know, Ron Gilbert, Dave Grossman, Tim Schafer. But it's just not quite on the same level as The Secret of Monkey Island. It feels like a sequel. And that's really its main issue. It's not so much that the game is bad or anything. It's actually a very, very good adventure game. And it, again, is very funny. But it suffers from sequelitis. And when you finally get to the end of the game, you're just kind of like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Okay. Well, not that anything in the Monkey Island games really makes sense, but you get the idea, I assume. Where it just kind of comes out of left field and it feels like a joke for the sake of a joke rather than a joke that actually fits in with what's going on. And ultimately that's what drags Monkey Island 2 down for me. It's, again, a very, very good adventure game. It's got some pretty challenging puzzles that are never really too horribly challenging. There's always something that kind of makes sense about it, and with a bit of trial and error, you can definitely figure out the solutions to the puzzles, although some of them did have me looking at a few of the hints in the special edition, just to get a sort of clue about what exactly I needed to do next, because it does suffer from a sort of linearity problem, where most adventure games are pretty linear. This one isn't quite as linear as most, so it's not necessarily apparent to you that this item you can get on this one island is going to be good for another island that you can go to at some other point. For example, the spitting competition puzzle. It's not immediately apparent to you that you need to get something to thicken your spit, and so it isn't necessarily something that you would think of off the top of your head, except with some trial and error, of course. You might go back to the island and be like, oh, right, but it might take you a while. It's things like that that just kind of bother me about the puzzle design of Monkey Island 2. Once again, it's very good stuff, for the most part, but it's just not quite as intuitive as The Secret of Monkey Island was. It's not something that you immediately go, ah, I get it now, using your logical processes. It's something you kind of have to think about, well, what else have I done, where have I been that would actually have something that would make sense out of this situation? Oh, yeah, back that way. So there's a fair bit of backtracking in this game, and that can get kind of tiresome after a while. But other than that, it's a very, very solid adventure game that is well worth playing, especially if you have played The Secret of Monkey Island. But as far as being a sequel to one of the best games ever made, it is a really tough act to follow, let's be fair here. And especially considering when they started development of this, and more importantly, how The Secret of Monkey Island is pretty self-contained, it makes it pretty hard to really justify a sequel, and thus this thing really does suffer from sequelitis. It's still a fantastic adventure game, once again, is well worth picking up, but it's just not quite as good as The Secret of Monkey Island. Thanks for watching.